What's going on YouTube? Thanks for tuning into the channel. Welcome to Oh So Simplified, coming to you with a video here about the path less traveled in the period of insignificance. As always, like, comment, subscribe, dislike if you don't like, leave comments, negative comments, positive comments, any feedback will do. And let's jump into this one. So what is this really talking about? The path less traveled, period of insignificance. This is two concepts that I got from two different books. One, I guess, is a short story by, I believe, Robert Frost, which is talking about the path less traveled, just going down a path that other people aren't necessarily going down. And then the second piece is from my favorite book, Mastery, and it talks about this period of insignificance. As always, these videos topics coming from specific instances of my life, trying to apply it back to something that you could use in yours. So the period of insignificance is really just this, he deems it like a 7 to 10 year period. I think it could be longer depending on when you're starting this period, like counting the period. But basically it's anybody who's ever achieved anything great. There was a period where they were in their field, hard working in their field, where he would say for 7 to 10 years, where if anybody were to see them, it would not, you wouldn't see the end product of what you see now. So if you looked at a Michael Jordan, when he was getting cut from his high school basketball team, you probably could not imagine he would be the Michael Jordan now. I just was listening to a book on George St. Pierre, who's like one of the best mixed martial artists ever. And basically he was talking about the first time he went to the Henzo Gracie gym in New York, and he's known as being very good on the ground, and how that period when he went there, he was basically getting tapped out by everybody. Once again, nobody would have imagined he would be the GSP that we know today. So in all these different fields within his book, he goes through like Da Vinci, Charles Darwin. I might use Darwin and Freddie Roach for this video, but basically how even those types of pioneers creating things within their specific fields, there was this long period of time where anybody looking at them would either think they're never going to become anything great, or almost to an extent that they're like a weirdo or a failure. Similar with Albert Einstein when he was working in a patent office. But I digress there. That's basically the period of insignificance. Yeah, being that the period of insignificance is just this period of time before the person has their big breakthrough. Generally, when they have their big breakthrough, people assume that they've been this person for their whole entire life. But previously, anybody observing, anybody that had known them, they were just a regular person, if not a little weird, because they're going off on their own path. They're doing something that's slightly different than what everybody else is doing for a larger payoff that most people looking from the outside cannot see, but there's huge shifts that are happening within them during that period, which allows them to reach those specific heights. So the second piece here is really the courage of your convictions. And this is a topic I talk about a lot, but it's really just having the belief in the direction that you want to go. Now, I think this needs to be tied to something super intrinsic. I think we all have somewhat of like an inner voice. I think different people have different capacities of one, hearing it, and then the next piece would be listening to it. So first, just being able to tune in and be quiet, be with yourself so that you can hear the voice, but then also having the courage to move towards that voice, whatever it's calling you to do, to chase it. So using two different stories that I thought were really good from Mastery would be one, I'll use Charles Darwin to start, and basically the idea that during his life, early on, he was kind of a screw-up. His dad was pretty prominent I think they're from England, so like in their society. And long story short, his dad was basically able to get him a job to work for the church, which is pretty prestigious. Charles was pretty much a screw-up, didn't really have a lot of prospects. He went to university, which is a little bit hard to get into back in those days, based on his father's like blessings and connections. He really didn't do that well. Only class he kind of was interested in was biology, but basically he was going to be like some like backup in the church, that he could clean stuff, have a somewhat high position, kind of being like a director of the church, and that would be his life. Charles was pretty eccentric. What he liked to do in his free time was like collect bugs and different specimens, things that nobody really understood how that could have any application to anything in the world. And essentially, he was offered by one of his biology teachers in university to get onto the HMS Beagle, which was the ship that ended up like sailing to the Americas, where he went to the Galapagos Islands and then comes up with this theory of evolution. But prior to that time of going there, everybody thought he was a weirdo that liked to collect bugs. He had no work prospects, and now he's about to hop on a ship when he's like a nerd. And you have to think, this isn't like a cruise ship. This is a freaking 1800 ship. There ain't no AC. People dying of scurvy. It's not like a great situation. And even when he got on this ship, because that was his dad's biggest thing, his dad was like, dude, you're not built to be on a ship. And he was right. He gets on it. He was getting seasick. None of the sailors liked him. He was basically just not in his element. I don't want to tell the whole story since it kind of gets outside of the scope of the topic of this. But basically, he goes through his trials and tribulations during the time on the boat, comes back as a different man, has his theory of evolution. And during that period, from going to those classes, being a screw up, nobody believing in him when he gets on the ship, all the trials and tribulations on the ship, then he comes back, and through all of those years in time, and once again understanding that this ship trek is not like a 10-day trip like we think of today. This is like a multiple month, year trip for him to get there and back. Over that time, and then also over the time of developing his theories, he became, you know, to be thought of as who we think of him now. But prior to that time, he was like kind of a quack job and a weirdo. Freddie Roach, who is one of the best boxing trainers of all time, famously trained Manny Pacquiao. That's probably his most famous pupil. Basically, he was boxing for his whole life. I think his brothers boxed, and he wasn't very good. Around 14, I think he got beat up pretty bad, and his mom basically is like, Freddie, like, why are you even boxing? You're not even any good. For some reason, that lit a fire within him. He basically became the best out of his brothers, but he was never like the pinnacle of the sport. He was one of those fighters that won against, like, you know, mid-level competition, but whenever he got to the higher level competition, he would kind of screw up and lose those fights. Basically hated boxing, became somewhat of a drunk, took up like an IT job, not an IT job, a telemarketing job where he's cold calling. Really didn't like his life or prospects at that time. Felt like a failed boxer, hated boxing, begrudgingly found himself back to the boxing gym with Eddie Futch and was just watching boxers box. He'd noticed there'd be a few people that Eddie Futch wasn't able to give individual attention to. He would give them individual attention, might see them sparring, throw some advice in their sparring rounds, this, that, and the third. Over time, some fighters started to really gravitate towards him and, you know, like the things that he was saying. As he's coming and showing up over and over again, his love for the sport starts to grow and grow and grow. And then he starts to actually have a stable of fighters, since Eddie Futch can't even manage all the fighters that he had at that point. And then through other circumstances, he comes up with, more advanced training techniques or protocols that he could use to make himself become a champion. But once again, during this period, while he was a fighter, while he was like a drunk and little despondent about what he was going to do, nobody from the outside would have looked at him and been like, this is going to be the best boxing trainer or one of the best boxing trainers of all time, 10 years from now. Which, through that process, he gained a stable of fighters. Then he met Manny Pacquiao. They had a rapport, won multiple championships with such a small fighter, moving up in multiple weights to become champion. And he was the main trainer of him and multiple other world champions. But basically, the main point is that they weren't thought of anything prior, and then they became something through that time period. And really the only thing that was guiding them in terms of their decision making was this inner voice, which is either telling, Charles, follow this biology route. You love collecting insects. You enjoyed that biology class. Hop on the ship. Something's telling you to go, even though that might not be your personality or bent. But go. This is something that you can do. Freddie Roach, even though you weren't a successful boxer, there's something within boxing that's like calling you to come back to the gym, even though you feel like you don't want to. And as you go there, it's kind of, once again, as like my old video, feeding your soul. It's giving you something back, and you're just following that feeling. Then you become, one of the greatest trainers. So it's just that courage of conviction, that, your belief in the inner voice that you have, and your courage to follow it, even though you don't know where it's going to end. I think when people talk about like a calling or a purpose, I think that's generally what they're referring to. It's this thing that's like calling you, and I don't think it's always super definite, but it's like a feeling that you can follow. And what you'll notice, and makes it the hardest part, most people are not following theirs. What they're following is the noise of everybody else. So what everybody else says is important to follow, that's what they think is important. And they're generally trying to put a show on that, look, I'm doing the correct thing. I'm doing the thing that I'm supposed to do. And what this will do for people that are following their inner voice is it will make you question what you're following. Like, oh, look at what they're getting. But what makes it easier for people like this is that are not following their calling, is that they can fabricate their joy of their life a lot easier than somebody following their calling. Because here's a very simple explanation. Let's say you're kind of on a purpose where you're not really going out as much. You're not going to party and meet with other people. You're doing things that are more solitary, things that are more focused on your passion. It could even be something as simple as getting sleep. You'll hear this person talk about this night out that they had that was super crazy. They got drunk. They were around all these people. They were doing all these things. And they'll tell it in a way that is very societally acceptable of what a good time is. Even though if you were at that particular place, checking in with them at any particular moment, the joy that they were actually having wasn't that high. The joy they're actually having is telling you the story. It's not that the time they had was so good. They're getting a dopamine hit for telling the story as if they did what is quote unquote fun, or what is quote unquote a good time. Not necessarily that they had a quote unquote good time. And this is something, especially for people that are younger, to understand, because for a long part of my life, like, I always would feel like I'm missing out. And then I would go to the place that these people are like telling me, like, dude, you need to come out, you need to do this. And it's like, I really didn't have that great of a time. And observing them, they weren't having that great of a time. Like, they're on their phone. Like, how could you be having this great of time being somewhere and you're on your phone that you could have done from home? And it's like, until I started to realize, it's like, oh, like, they're not actually having a good time. They're having a good time almost fitting in. And when you're taking the road less traveled, you're not going to fit in. And that's something where I keep going back to the courage of your convictions. You're going to have to just believe in your vision that it's going to pay off in the end, that you're following something intrinsic to you. And all these things and all these carrots that people dangle in front of your head are not for you. And they can't convince you that you're going to enjoy something that inside you're not being pulled to enjoy. Because what's right for, even if they are actually having fun, what's right for them might not be right for you. But I would, from my assessment and generally what I see is, like, they're not really having the good time that they express. It's more of, that's a way for them to validate and justify what they did, rather than for it to really exemplify how happy they were, spending their time doing something that really has no meaning moving forward. And generally, when I look at people that, excessively party, like, they're not really even hanging out with people they care about that much. But I digress on that, because I don't think there's anything wrong with doing those things. It's just, understand that if you take the road less traveled, people are going to do things, and they're going to kind of not throw it in your face, but explain it to you as if you should be wanting to do those things. But if you're following your inner voice, it's most likely not going to be what the masses are doing. And the last piece is really that the dots only connect looking backwards. And I think Freddie Roach's his story is the one that exemplifies this the most, because it really wasn't clear when he went back to the boxing gym what this was going to turn into. It was just that he heard the voice, he had the courage to follow it, and he took action upon that voice and that vision. Because as long as you have the vision, you don't know how things are going to happen, and as long as you keep moving in that direction, things have to happen. And the present, and this is a hard concept to fully understand, but the present can always change the past. So there's this story, and I think I've told it in another video. It's like the Chinese farmer story, where basically there's like a Chinese farmer. He has a horse. It's a beautiful horse, and one day the horse runs away, and then all the villagers are like, "Oh, Mr. Lee, I'm so sorry. That's such a terrible thing. You lost your most valuable horse in the whole world. You know, what are you gonna do?" And he's like, "Maybe." 1 week later, that horse, comes back, and then there's 7 wild horses. Now he has 7 horses. Now he's training these horses. He's going to sell these horses. They're like, "Oh, Mr. Lee, what a great thing. You got your horse back plus 7 more horses. Now you're in such a great spot." So he has his son training the horses, whatever. His son, as he's training one of the wild horses, the horse, flips him, knocks him over, breaks his leg. They're like, "Oh, Mr. Lee, how terrible. You're an old man. How are you going to train the horses? Your son, he broke his leg, whatever. And then once again, as he said the last 2 times, he's like, "Oh, maybe." Then the conscription army comes, taking any son that is, any man that is above the age of 14 to take to the army. As they go to Mr. Lee's house, they see that his son has a broken leg, and they're like, "We're not going to take your son, take all the sons from the village." They're like, "Oh, Mr. Lee, how fortunate you are that he had a broken leg. Now all of our sons are gone to war, but your son, is still here, and you can, stay with him." And then he says maybe. And the main idea is that, you really never know how any event is going to turn out in totality, in the end. So it's like, at the end of the day, you don't know how things are going to play out, and things that happen in the present can always change the view of something that happened in the past. And this could even be with a sentence. I was just listening to Alan Watts. If I said the sentence, "I love you," at the point at which I said you don't actually know what I mean. I can change the meaning of I if I've said hate at the end of that. "I hate you" has now changed the past word of I. So things that happen in the present can change the past. So a lot of the times we make determiners scared of what's happened in the past, but not walking into the unknown of the present/future and being in the present unknown situation, where that situation with new things that happen could change completely your view of what happened in the past. And a lot of the times it's a very hard concept to understand, that time is something we've constructed to understand the world around us, that some of the fixity that we have mentally of time is a little bit of an illusion. And I digress on that point. I don't want to stay on that too much, but I want to just focus on the idea that if you take action in your present, it can change the color of what has happened in the past. And the last thing is just really that your vision, and vision being your ability to listen to your inner voice and kind of create a world of what that inner voice is telling you, or direction of where it wants you to go. And then your ability to take action on that is the most critical of anything I'm discussing in this whole video. Because, it basically answers everything. Not getting caught up with the noise of what other people are saying. Your ability to hear and then take action on that voice. And with that, something has to happen. That is definitely how the universe works, or anything works, and you can break this down scientifically. If you're putting new inputs in, new outputs have to come out of it. And then certain inputs have to have certain outputs. So if you're doing things that are moving towards that inner calling, and you can see that vision clearly, and you're consistently taking action on that vision, an output like that vision has to come into play, just like 2 + 2 = 4, because every action has a reaction. And then this is where I start to get into a little bit of that mystical world, is that I believe that your like subconscious or inner voice can actually tap into like the brain of the universe, or the consciousness that's tying everything together. The same way I can look at my dog and interact with my dog on some capacity, even though we're different species and different have completely different languages and ways of understanding. That level of which that's connecting everything, that is your inner calling that you can develop this vision on, actually can see the things that can actually be brought into the real world and consciousness. So as you act towards that vision, you're actually directly almost like adding 2 + 2 = 4. Is like you're literally putting out physically the things that will create the vision in your head. That as long as you keep sticking to that and keep pushing it out, it has to manifest, because that's the only way anything happens. The same way that when I want to reach my hand forward, I can reach my hand forward. If I want to make an idea in my head come to fruition, it just might take more actions and more repetitions of me putting things out there, but eventually I can actually create that picture, just like I could draw a picture from my mind if I could teach my hand how to make all the strokes. So it's that idea that anything that's in your head, if you act on it enough, it has to come to fruition. So that's really it for this one. Once again, like, comment, subscribe, dislike if you didn't like the video. You can leave negative comments too. Positive comments are better, but you know what it is. Until next time, peace out.